Welcome to Revealing Conversations with Petra Nicoll from the beautiful Louis River. And is it a beautiful day today? The sun is out. Today I have the great pleasure of interviewing a good friend of mine, actually, Robert Heilman. I met him when I had my juice bar / healing center / massage parlor. Robert used to come in and support us and buy carrot juice at least twice a week. And we had some very nice conversations. Robert's been published and has actually 3 books out. One of them is called Overstory 0, which is one of the books we'll be discussing today. And it's about the logging industry. And since we've had all these fires in Southern Oregon around Roseburg, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about the forest. And Robert Heilman and his beautiful wife, Diane, live in Myrtle Creek, which is between Roseburg and Grants Pass, Southern Oregon, and it's a beautiful place. So if you ever want to get off the beaten path and take on I-5, the Myrtle Creek exit, it's really worth the drive. And now I know why you live there, because I visited there the other day and I said, this is a good place to go and buy some property. I like Myrtle Creek, Robert. Robert has written professionally over 35 years now. His articles, essays, radio broadcasts, news, commentaries, and features and opinion columns have been published 350 times. He is also the author of Whirlpool, that was published in 2016, and Children of Death, that was published last year. We are going to do another show just on that book alone, which is fascinating. I love that book. He's the writer and director of Henry and Us, a documentary film. I didn't know you were a filmmaker. I might have to hire you. Robert, you better get ready. He's the winner of 3 awards, 1990, 1996, and 2007. So congratulations, Robert. It's quite an achievement of your literary work. And today we're going to talk about Overstory 0. So my first question, of course, is what does Overstory 0 mean, the title of your second book?
The title is actually the title of an essay that's in the book. It's a collection of essays. And it happens to be an essay about planting trees for a living, which is what I did when I was much younger than I am now, since it's very, very strenuous work. One day I was planting trees up, where was it? Up the Lone Rock Road out of Glide is where it was. And I got to be curious. I was curious about the place, about the unit, which is what they call these things. It was a clear cut, an old one. And I knew that it was what was called a replant. Ground that had to be gone over again because it didn't work when they planted it before. So I was curious, when was this originally cut down? How often was it replanted? Turned out we were going back for the 3rd time. It had been cut originally in 1956. So this was probably, I don't know, 1977, 20 years later, something. But I picked up, the foreman had a clipboard sitting on the hood of his truck there at lunchtime. So I picked it up to look at it, and I discovered, yes, it was cut in 1956. This is the 3rd time they've tried to establish some trees on this ground. But I also noticed something else. The form that tracked all those sorts of things, elevation, aspect, what direction is it planting, the soil types, everything else, it's all little boxes that you check out and write your numbers in, you see. Well, there was a box that said Overstory, and it had a 0. Well, the overstory is the canopy of the forest, the branches and leaves that throw all the shade over your head. An old growth Douglas fir forest, might have a canopy up at 150, 200 feet. And so there are layers. So underneath the overstory, there are understories. So it might have 3 different layers in the forest. Trees that grow up, don't grow up to full 200 feet, but they do grow up less than that, So that's an understory. Well, I thought this is very strange. Here I am on what's supposed to be a forest, but it's one in which the overstory, the canopy, the tallest point of the vegetation, measures 0. It's not there, you see, because I was in a clear cut. And so this struck me as interesting. A few years later, there became this big controversy over the old growth forest management, whether we should keep cutting trees or not, whether certain species might go extinct. They're terrible problems that were coming up. And it became a national story. So I forget which magazine it was, New York Times or Time Magazine, I don't know. Some reporter came out from back east and was in Roseburg. And in his article, he spoke of Roseburg as being, pardon me, ground zero in the old growth forest debate. And I remember thinking at the time, ground zero, that's not right. Ground zero is the area right beneath an atomic bomb blast. You see, ground zero in Hiroshima was the city hall. But the problem there we're dealing with is overstory 0, you see? So that again struck me. And then later on, I was writing for a publication out of Hillsboro, Oregon, called Left Bank, and Dennis Delaney Stovall's magazine. And they did theme issues. And theme one time was gotta earn a living. So it was about work. So I decided, okay, I'll write this essay about tree planting, something I know about. It's work that I've done. And writing along, I recalled that afternoon at lunchtime, look at the foreman's clipboard and the form, and I recalled the phrase overstory 0. And so I used that as the title for the piece. Later on, when the collection went to Sasquatch Books out of Seattle, the publisher there didn't like my title, which would have been 100 Valleys, after the 100 Valleys of the Umpqua where I live. And they decided to name the book after that particular essay. It's probably one of the stronger essays in the book. And so it became the title essay of the book. It's caused some minor problems over the years because it's not an easy thing to get across to people. But there it is. It's at least interesting. Nothing else.
That is really interesting that it would be 0, that, I mean, the first thing I think about is 9/11, ground zero. And so when you were working in the woods and you were working in mills, for how many years did you actually do that?
Well, from 1976 to about 83 or 84 or so. Yeah, I planted trees for 5 winters, but did logging and mill work as well in between. It's a seasonal work. Tree planting is winter work.
In between writing.
Well, yeah, there was writing as well, yeah.
When you've worked in the woods and the mills, but you've also sat on the boards of director for 2 different environmental groups, isn't that a little bit contradictory?
Well, luckily I'm a bit of a contrarian at times.
No
You know.
kidding. Okay.
Yeah, no, truly. When I'm around the environmentalists, I talk like a logger. When I'm around the loggers, I talk like an environmentalist.
You like to push buttons.
Yeah, well, it's not just that, but I'm a great believer in complexity, and
Well said.
I don't trust simple explanations. And when it came to the management of the forests, the reasons it came about were very complex. And the things that were happening were themselves very complex. And the political argument, though, was very simple, you see. And so this is something that worries me, you know, that people, nuance doesn't work well politically. If you want to be a leader and get people to follow you, you can't. You can't get them to get behind ambiguity. Say, but it must be very clear cut. It must be owls versus jobs, environmentalists versus workers. You see.
It's very linear. Very linear.
Yes, it is, and you know, it's at the heart of demagoguery. Really, this is how demagoguery works. I was at a speech one time. Jesse Jackson came to Roseburg. He'd been invited by the mill workers. The workers had invited him because he was a very strong supporter of working people, blue collar stuff, unions and that sort of stuff. So the union invited him to Roseburg because they figured he would be talking in favor of them in opposition to environmentalism. Well, he didn't do that. And it was very interesting sitting there in the audience and seeing up on the stage, we had the county commissioners and timber industry officials and union officials sitting up there on the stage, and Jesse Jackson talking. Well, at one point, Jesse Jackson says, this is not about workers versus environmentalists. He said, this is about workers and environmentalists against the greedy and the wasteful. And everybody in the place stood up and clapped and cheered. Everybody, the entire room, regardless of whether they were there because they were supporting the union or supporting the environment. The entire room, everybody agreed at that one golden moment. Of course, in less than 24 hours, everybody was back at each other's throats again. But you see, this complexity is what I believe in. That there are third ways and fourth ways and fifth ways and sixth ways that don't get discussed when you're down to just black or white, this or that. You see, things in opposition, bumping heads all the time. Horseshit.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So can you give us a brief history of how logging and forest management have affected our forests over the years? You are, you know, very knowledgeable on this subject. And I was very, very worried with this fire. Speaking of Lone Rock that you mentioned, and that entire area, of course, all the way from Idlewild up to Steamboat Inn has now burned. And I'm very sad about it because even, you know, a long, long time ago, I lived up there, up Susan Creek Road on this beautiful 120 acres in this gorgeous lake house that is now gone. And You know, I personally know 30 people that have lost their homes. And how do you feel about that, Robert? I mean, could there have been anything that could have been done? I mean, I know there were, you know, winds and storms and fire, you know, electric lines down, and that's what caused the fire. I don't know for sure, but that's the rumor I heard. So what's your thought on this?
Well, we had an extraordinary situation there with the wind. I grew up in Southern California. We used to have in the fall what were called Santa Anas, the Santa Ana winds. You get a high pressure to the east over the mountains and low pressure to the west of that over the ocean. And when those are very high and very low, and they bump up against each other, all of a sudden, heavy, strong winds come pouring over the mountains, rushing out to the sea. Well, this is not that unusual in Southern California. It's very unusual in Western Oregon. But this is what we had. They were extremely strong winds. It's really just maybe a once every 20, 30 years sort of event. So that was a huge contributing factor. Yes, it was power lines, tree branches, trees falling down on power lines, tree branches causing sparks, and little fires got very big. There was a drought condition. We hadn't had a drop of rain for 3 months. And this in the midst of a year where we only had about 65% of our usual rainfall for the year. So extremely dry, drier than a popcorn fart. I mean, just bad. So those things, those combinations, fuel, wind, sparks, were the immediate causes for that. But a lot of what we're dealing with is over 100 years worth of forests being logged, you see. The old time loggers, and I used to work with some of them when I was peeling poles for a living, you know. You've seen telephone poles, power poles? Mm-hmm. Well, those come in as raw logs, and we would shoot, and peel the bark off of them for 7 cents a linear foot I was getting. Mm-hmm. So back then, it was good money. I was making $7 an hour. So it was good money, but these old men that I was working with, they were in their 70s, you see. So this was in the 1970s, which means they were born right around the year 1900, between 1900 and 1910. And they remembered the old days, and they told me about them and how they used to work and what the techniques were that they had to use, and about being very young boys working in logging camps and things, you know. It was a very different style of logging back then. No chainsaws. The modern equipment that they have nowadays did not exist, you know. They're hauling logs out of the woods with oxen and with horses and such. So they selectively logged. They would not bother with any tree that didn't, you know, they just wanted the very best ones. It was called high grading. And it didn't have that much of an impact on the forest itself, you see, because they weren't completely cutting 100, 200 acres at a time and laying everything on the ground all at once. That changed due to, well, especially heavily here in Douglas County after the Second World War. The demand for lumber was very great right after the war during the 1950s and all of that. You had all of these soldiers coming back. They had good low interest loans from the government called the GI Bill. Places like Southern California were miles and miles and miles of suburban homes being built, thrown up in just everywhere you looked all at once. So there was a huge demand for the wood. The more wood you could get out, the faster you could get it out. Therefore, the cheaper you could get it out, the more money you could make, the bigger the profit. And that's what drove these changes. Well, what went from a lot of very small outfits doing a little bit of work each, it became consolidated. And as it became consolidated, the technology became more and more expensive and more efficient in hauling in larger and larger and larger amounts of logs every day, you see. So in order to pay off the expensive machines, you had to get a lot of wood through and get it into the mill and sell it off to, well, you know, actually a lot of it went to Europe, to rebuild Europe after the war. Wow. About big chunks of Germany, big chunks of the Netherlands, big chunks of Britain were rebuilt with Douglas fir from Oregon and Washington, yeah, and California. I mean, this is true because their forests were not capable of handling it. And the need for wood was so great. So part of this became these large clear cuts, the notion that of replanting came along. Tree farming, they would call it. That's the way they sold it to the public anyway. This was developed by Weyerhaeuser Corporation. Philip Weyerhaeuser sold it to his board of directors as a publicity thing. Well, not really sure whether it would actually work or not back around 1939, 40 or so. And it became very acceptable that, well, we can treat the forest as though it were simply a crop, like corn, like wheat. Mm-hmm. You know, you come, you take it, you grow another crop, you take that, grow another crop. But it doesn't, it turns out that, no, that's not actually sustainable. Mm-hmm. What they practice, even to this day, really is called sustained yield. And the goal of which is to keep getting wood off of the same piece of land over and over and over again through this cycle of regrowing. Plant, cut it all, plant it, regrow it. Well, when you do that, what you end up with is not really a forest. Right. It's a plantation. It's like trying to call an apple orchard a forest. It's not. It's a bunch of trees. They're all exactly the same kind of trees. They're all the same height. They're all the same age. And they're very short, especially during the first 20, 30 years. And they burn easily. And exactly. And this is the landscape across which this Archie Creek fire that you've been talking about took off. 72,000 acres of land burned up in the first 12 hours of that fire.
Oh, it makes me cry. It's just...
That is so much. It is so much. That's over 100 square miles. That's in 12 hours. It's a firestorm. Yeah. The clouds that come up with that are called the pyrocumulus clouds. And it's terrible. It's a horrible thing that happens. But 6,000 acres per hour burned up in this fire.
Well, they had no chance. There was no chance. I spoke to a friend of mine who's in Idlewild somewhere and at somebody's house right now, and he lost his place, and he knew there was a drought, and he cleared a lot of the brush, and a lot of they did a lot of preliminary work, but he said that fire came, there was no chance for anything to survive.
Yeah, it moves very, very swiftly. You can't imagine how quick that fire moved. It's just, it's a terrible thing. So it's a problem. It leaves the land vulnerable, but there are a lot of other things that go on with the clear cut slash and replant thing that are very rough on the environment. This is what led to the northern spotted owl being declared an endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. And because the habitat disappears. The habitat disappears, the creatures that depend on that habitat disappear. There's a relationship between the creatures and the forest itself that's very important. There are truffles on the roots of the trees that help them to grow and do well. Well, redback voles come live up in the trees, they nest up in the trees, they come down and they dig up those truffles to eat them. Mm-hmm. When they eat the truffles, they have spores in their body and they run around pooping those out. Mm-hmm. Well, who eats the redback voles? The northern spotted owl eats the redback voles. You see? So all of these things are interconnected, as John Muir pointed out, of course, so famously, that we start pulling on the weave, one little thread, and you quickly find that you're affecting all of it. Mm-hmm. So back in the 80s, the 1980s, later 1980s, I was working for a magazine called Siskiyou Country. And so that was basically an environmental group, bioregionalism they were into, is what they called it. But I ended up interviewing a lot of scientists and activists and such, people who are concerned about it, And the industry and the government were very much opposed to changing the way things were done. The industry, obviously, because of the money involved. Well, the government too, the local government, our local government here, our county government, it was getting a lot of money, $40–50 million a year from the sale of trees on federal land. Mm-hmm. The Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management were making a lot of money selling the trees. And it's kind of rare for a government agency to actually make money, One winter I planted trees for the Bureau of Land Management, and that was one of the things they were very proud of, we make money for the government. It was a big thing for them. So they were opposed to changing things, and yet the scientists were telling them, this is not sustainable. You're going to harm this, that all we have to work with is air, sunlight, water, and soil. And anything you do that harms any of those four harms the system that sustains us, you see? So it became this huge political controversy thing, and it was very sad, really. The rhetoric that was coming out from our local timber industry group, the Douglas Timber Operators, especially at the time, was extremely harsh, extremely demagogic, really. I mean, it really was. politicians were saying things like, you have enemies who want to destroy you by shutting down the woods. Your family will be destroyed. This community will be, I mean, you know, this is serious stuff. And of course, what happened? Death threats were going around. I could tick off the names of 7 or 8 people very quickly who received death threats simply because they wanted the forest to be handled more responsibly, more gently, you know. And so it was very sad. It was a terrible thing, and we're still suffering from that to this day. But the techniques have improved a little. Not the size of the clear cuts have gotten a bit smaller, not a whole lot smaller, but and they're tending to leave a little bit more slash on the ground than they used to. Some of the research that was being done back in the 80s that the scientists were telling me would become the future of forestry are being used. You know, some of that has come in, but still the underlying goal of it is to get as much wood as you can, as cheaply as you possibly can, and as often as you possibly can. So the goal is profit.
Right.
Corporate
Well,
profit.
corporate greed wins out again. But, you know, I'm very hopeful with the hemp industry finally back that there will be more and more factories opening that are producing building materials out of hemp. So hopefully we can change our building practices slightly to switch to, you know, different crops. Rather than looking at trees as a crop that can be replanted and clear cut constantly and destroying the forests. So
yeah, it's a matter of scale. Which seems to me the problem with a lot of things is large scale enterprises tend to be harmful on a very large scale. But there really is such a thing as sustainable forestry, truly sustainable forestry. I believe in it very firmly. I have no problem with logging as long as it's done properly. But the way it's been done for the last 70 years is a stupid way to go. And I'm in favor of smart forestry.
Yeah. So Robert, much of your magazine journalism concerned environmental degradation. That was the learning process. What was that learning process like for you? Do any particular stories that you wrote about stand out decades later? I mean, I know you already just summed that up, but what stands out the most for you?
Well, as getting back to what we were talking about earlier, is the complexity and the failure to embrace complexity and the effect that has had on the community that I live in. You know, one thing that has come along with this, there's a great deal of talk about, you know, job loss due to cutting back on the amount of timber coming off of the forests. And yes, a percentage of it is due to that. There's been a tremendous drop in the number of people working in the timber industry now. Big chunk of that is also due to automation. But one of the things that people don't seem to want to talk about is the drop in wages. Yeah. The average timber worker right now, today, is earning 20% less than what they were working back when I worked in the woods.
It's
20% less. Has the job gotten that much easier? No. It's again corporate greed. You see, they've forced people to accept lower wages, and so all that money that used to float around the county is gone. Millions and millions of dollars. Just in the 10-year period from 1978 to about 1988, 79 to 89, that 10-year period there was a loss of $46 million a year in wages that used to circulate around the county that disappeared, evaporated, gone. So not only were the companies manipulating their workers by getting them to back the company's political stance, don't list the owl, but at the same time they were using the fear of the environmental movement as a lever to help get them to work for less wages, less benefits. You see.
Well, statistics. So what I've been reading is that many of the jobs, labor jobs, are going to be replaced by AI. 60%. I mean, that's it's here.
Yes.
So
yeah.
So they're
well,
trying
all of
to
this.
introduce universal income, as you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all of that was predicted back in 1976. There was a report called the Buter Report. John Buter was the head forester for the state of Oregon, the Department of Forestry. And he did the first ever survey of timber supply in Western Oregon. And what he predicted was that there would be lots of job losses, lots of mills shutting down, lots of trouble for the timber industry coming up in the 1980s and 1990s. He didn't predict the Endangered Species Act kicking in and affecting things as well. But still, we knew that. I mean, it was out there already. There were meetings with the county commissioners explaining to them what was coming. They knew about it. All of this was known within the industry. It was known within the government. Years and years and years before the troubles even began. You see, 45 years ago, it was known that we'd be in the situation we're in now today. The steps to help offset that were not taken. They were not taken. So
and why were they not taken? Greed?
That's what the film conclusion I can come to.
Yeah.
Really.
It's very sad, but of course, nature has a way of showing us. Nature is our teacher. And so we're witnessing these devastating wildfires and thousands and thousands and thousands of people losing homes. And so we have to change our practices. We have to make some change. Do you think it is possible?
It is. I think it's possible. I am not so sanguine about it coming about anytime soon, unfortunately. Even people, there are pro-industry people right now who are making the argument that, well, this fire wouldn't have happened if they just would have let us log all that stuff ahead of time, you see, then it wouldn't have been there to burn up and everything would have been fine, So restoration is going to take a long time and a lot of work. There's a tremendous amount of work to be done. And this is something that's very hopeful, really. I mean, if we can put local people to work doing this restoration work, you see.
Yeah.
Maybe we won't be losing all of our young men and women. You know, this is a huge problem around here. The young people don't stay here. You see, they get out of high school and they run off to the cities, and you never see them again. You see, you walk around Douglas County, and it's old people everywhere. We have very high rates of elderly people here in this county. We have very high rates of poverty as well. You see, I live here in Myrtle Creek. It's a 25% poverty rate in our end of the county here. Yeah, Myrtle Creek, Riddle, Canyonville, Glendale, Azalea, East Creek, Chiller. 25%, 1 out of every 4 households is living in poverty. You see, the recession of the early 1980s, the Ronald Reagan recession came along, and we lost a sizable chunk of our workforce in about a 2-year period there. What happened? Young families left. They had to find work. There was no work. Yeah. When you've got a 18% unemployment rate, what are you going to do?
Well, you see that in China as well, where parents are leaving their children with grandparents and they have to migrate into the cities.
Absolutely, yes. It's a global thing. It's a global thing. Rural people all over the world are in deep trouble and have been really since the start of the Industrial Revolution. You know, it goes clear back to the Enclosure Acts in Britain back in the 17th century, when they figured out that it's a lot more profitable to run sheep instead of having tenant farmers. You see, we just run a bunch of sheep, sell the wool to the wool mill, make more money. You see, this is why the British did not respond to the potato famine in the 1840s there in Ireland. You know, let's get rid of these people. You see, so it's almost genocide, really. And it doesn't seem to matter what the political socio-economic system is that you're living under at the time, whether it's a monarchy or a republic or a democracy, communism, socialism, unrestrained capitalism. It doesn't matter. The rural people get screwed.
Right.
So a big chunk of that is because they don't need it.
What's the solution? What's the solution of our utopian world? I'd love to write a book about that. I'm working on a 4th book on my billionaire trilogy. So this is one of the chapters, is this environmental problem that we're facing, you know. We have to get back to the village concept, I believe. And we have to create jobs. And you know, people, the young people, the millennials are quite aware and waking up to the fact that they can't just run after the mighty dollar, and that being rich and famous doesn't necessarily make you happy. So I'm noticing this with a lot of young people that I talk to. I have a lot of young friends. You know, it's not their priority. Is you know, fame and fortune.
Yeah, they're a more creative generation than mine was, which I think is interesting, you know, in and of itself. Yeah. I think what hope there is lies in small scale enterprises, you know, and I just, you know, generally, the bigger the outfit is, the more destructive it's likely to become, you know. And we're seeing huge things going on right now. Amazon is, of course, being the prime #1 example there. But other outfits too, Walmart, you see, you know, the Waltons. These dominants that is keyed to profit. Profit in the sense of digits, you know, money. Well, what the hell's money anyway? It's an agreed upon fiction.
Exactly.
Really all it is. What's a corporation? Well, it's a legal fiction. It doesn't actually exist. That is to say, there's no backside to kick, no soul to be damned. It's simply this system which has no limits. There's no such thing as a limit to how much profit could be made, even though we live in a finite world. So
yeah,
one or the other has to give there. And it is the abstract concept that eventually destroys what's real, you see? And we see this in a moral sense as well, I've noticed, you know. When people come up against these sociopathic artificial beings that we call corporations, they will inevitably lose, you see? Because they are human. We are human. And so we come with human expectations. But we bring our human expectations and they are not returned to us at all. We are instead bumping up against something that has no mind, has no soul, has no heart, you see? So much of what we see going on these days is a clash between intellectual knowledge and emotional knowledge. You see? And so both are valid, both are real, but the instinctual knowledge, the emotional knowledge, the wordless knowledge, the knowledge that comes to you without words, and you find the words for them later. These are very real things, you see. We need to figure out ways to acknowledge that and to honor it and to protect it, because it's what makes us human. And otherwise, we're just, being thrown into the maw of the machine and ground up.
Yeah, we become cyborgs, merge with the machine. And that seems to be in the plan, is to get us to conform and behave and do what we're told. And so I always encourage everyone with retreats and nature walks and that sort of thing, to stay connected to your humanness, to your intuition, to your dreams, and to stay away. Like somebody said to me the other day, we were talking about diet and the whole fast food generation, and so many people are getting sick from it. And I said, if it has a label, don't eat it. If it has a label, don't eat it. It's that simple. I thought it was the best explanation, because if you go to the supermarket and you're feeling, weakened by the food you're eating, just look at the ingredient lists. You got to get away from all these fabricated things. You have to get away from these artificial things that we're putting in our body. Put your cell phone down. Give yourself a limit of whether it's minutes or an hour a day or whatever, but not 10 hours a day. And now they have our children locked up in the houses. They can't go to school and they're on the computer. It made me very sad. My son used to go to the Waldorf school, but they didn't allow computers and technology in the first few years of their schooling. And it was very sad to see those schools close and to have to learn only via computer, which is so dehumanizing. I have a real problem with that this is being done to our children.
Yeah, get in trouble sometimes when I try to tell people that basically kids don't need school anyway, for the most part. You know,
Yeah, I agree
I
with
mean, no, it's true. You know, it really is. It really is. What they need is to play
they need to be in the
outside and play.
gardens and play with animals and be outside.
Yeah,
I think, Robert, we need to get together and open a nature school. How about a farm somewhere?
yeah,
That'd be good.
yeah. Well, I do know what I need to do, which is to keep writing.
You need to keep writing. And now you and I are going to have another interview in the next few weeks. We're going to be talking about your book that you published in 2019. And it is titled Children of Death. Do you want to give a little synopsis of what that book is about?
Well, sure, I could, I suppose. As a child growing up in the 1950s, right after World War II, I was very puzzled about my family. My father's mother and father both spoke German. What I learned later was a very rural kind of dialect from Alsace, France, actually. But there it was. They spoke Franconian German, and but they had both been born in Russia. And so this was, of course, when I was very young, it never occurred to me that people in Russia would speak anything but German, you know. But it led me to wonder about that. How did our family end up in Russia? Where did they start from in Germany?
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather came over in 1909, settled in North Dakota, where he farmed for 40 years before he finally had a stroke. Passed away about a year later. But what happened to his family there that he left behind? Nobody knew. Well, all grandfather would say was that they're all dead, all lost, you know. Alle verloren, alles gestorben. So I would try to get some answers. You know, I remember asking my father about it one time, and he just kind of brushed it off. We're Americans, you know. I didn't realize, of course, that at the time wasn't a good time to be German here in America after 2 world wars, and particularly with the Holocaust. And it was a downright dangerous time to be Russian because of the Cold War and the Soviet Union and all of that. And better dead than red politicians strutting their stuff. So all of this was kind of hidden from me. And it was something that bothered me for a lot of years, you know, just something there in the back of my head. I became a writer. One of the gigs I had was writing for Southern Oregon Historical Society. So I knew how to do research, you see. I knew how to get into an archive. I knew how to look at microfilms. I knew how to find out things that were hidden from me. And I decided to go looking. And so that's what this book is about.
I'm excited to have that chat with you. To you, the listener, please click the subscribe button and the little bell and like our videos so that you can get alerts for our next video that is coming up on YouTube. I love talking to people like Robert and learn about the local people in our towns that are doing such extraordinary work to bring history back or to bring some life or breathe some life into the olden days. And I think for all of us right now, with everything that is going on the planet and right before this election, Many people are very weary. Many people are very feeling anxiety and stress, not just stress of job loss, emotional stress, but stress for their children, for the future. And so we have to learn from history. And so I'm so very happy. I'm so glad to know you, Robert, and that you're continuing to do this very important work. So thank you very much for being on the show today. So,
well, thank you, Petra. I sure appreciate it.
it's a dog. I kept thinking, what is it? What is that sound?
Oh.
And now I know. It's your dog. Now we got to see the dog before we close the show. Aww. Bring him up a little. Aw, what a sweetie. Hi. What's his or her name?
Her name is Sally.
I knew it was a female. Hi, Sally. You're going to go for a walk now in this beautiful afternoon in Myrtle Creek?
Yeah, I suppose. I've got some yard work to do. That's probably what I'll end up doing.
Yeah, me too. I've got leaves that are inches and inches stacked high. I need to get the blowout.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to put my vegetable garden to bed for the winter.
So anyway, I look forward to having the conversation about your last book, and let's get together again soon, and wish you a wonderful afternoon gardening and cleaning your yard.
Okay.
Take care, Robert. Namaste. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.